All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Fighting Words, and today you are only staring at Kyle and Jonathan's ugly mugs because we don't actually have a guest to interview, and that was kind of on purpose?
Kind of on purpose, kind of like it's the holidays, we're kind of run ragged. We needed just to, like, change it up a little bit.
Yeah, so honestly, we've been sitting here BSing about video games and anime and furries. That's been our conversation.
It's been a weird morning.
Yeah, only part of it's recorded, thank God.
Thank
yeah, so we're going to sit here and talk about training, I think is actually our plan.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about some training for competition, some ideas, some things that, you know, kind of like shop talk, like things you could actually take home and utilize versus all the other crap we've just been spewing the last couple of days.
And we haven't really prepared. This is going to be a really off-the-cuff, whiskey and the coffee kind of a conversation. So hopefully this is something you guys enjoy. If it's useful, let us know. If it brings up more questions that you'd like us to sit here and buzzed and talk about on a different episode, that would be great too. This is really just kind of our catch-all things we've been thinking about for the last couple months as we've been recording interviews that we'd like to talk about, just the two of us. So we don't have any notes. This is very freeform, and our incredible tech guy, Alec, is hopefully going to edit this post and make us look wonderful. So he's smiling and nodding behind the camera, so I'm going to take that as a yes.
It's amazing what editing can do.
Man, let's start with this. Kyle, I'm going to ask you to start with this. What's different for you between kind of your normal maintenance training and what you do getting ready for a tournament? And clearly that's going to change tournament to tournament depending on your goals, but as a rule, what do you change about your training when you're getting ready to compete versus your maintenance training?
So if we're talking about, like, I am in decent shape or whatnot, my focus whenever I'm off season, let's say, is that when you're off season, you're looking at a wide berth of techniques and things that you're trying to work on. You're more on the spectrum of art to application. You play more in the art realm. Like, okay, where was I during competition week? What is an area that I have not touched on? So let's say I've been very much lacking in binding techniques, right? So now I'm going to be working on, like, how do I secure an overbind? How do I, like, use crump how to get into a position? Something like that. And, like, I'll kind of skew all over the place because I'm just trying to build, like, proficiency and, like, not even expertise into a field, but, like, increase my spectrum of techniques in general. A lot of times whenever we're in off season, I don't even want to pick up the weapon that I use for competition. I want to pick up weapons I don't normally use. So, like the halberd.
More of an expansion and less of a focus.
Yeah, because whenever you pick up a new weapon, it's so novel that even though you have techniques from other stuff, you're trying to learn how to apply them there, and it gives you another angle on, like, how do you bind with a dewsack, which is a short weapon,
right,
versus a halberd, which is a big weapon. So that increases, like, my fluency in the techniques across different weapons, which keeps it from being boring, because it's about not being bored a lot.
Okay, no, I can see that on the psychological aspect. On a more pragmatic aspect, do you feel like you gain from that diversity of training?
A very, very much.
Like, what is it? If you're describing an off-season thing, and obviously there's some psychological aspects because you don't want to get bored and all of that. But what benefit do you gain for competition by branching out? Because you're not usually going to have a dewsack tournament wherever you go. You're not usually going to have a halberd tournament wherever you go. I mean,
we're working.
We should suggest that to everybody who's running tournaments. I want to fight with dewsacks and halberds, but generally we're talking about you mostly have sword and buckler. You mostly have longsword. Kind of the basic stuff. So what benefit do you get specifically for your tournament by diversity of training?
So weapons of different length and weights bring out different attributes of a fight. Okay. So, like, a dagger brings out more of the close quarters. It's very rapid, very fast. A lot of use of the offhand compared to, like, with longsword, your offhand is moving the weapon.
Sure.
Sword and buckler, you have to have this other hand moving around more. So it gets kind of that left brain, right brain. It also gets close quarters, you're more grappling. You have to be more on your setups, because after you get just the basics down of a dagger fight, now you have to, like, get really good at feinting and moving in and out of range.
Clearly, yeah.
So that brings out that attribute that with a longsword you might not need. or might not be developing as much because you have a game. I go in, I do the standard ringek, I hit fighting distance, I fire a shot in that's from long range, hits hard, I bind and wind, and then I exit out or something.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and like, some of the weapons, the smaller they get, the faster they are. And so you get used to a level of speed that you would not normally have with longsword. Because as soon as you engage with Dusak, you're firing like 5 shots. Versus like longsword, you might fire 2 or 3 and then move away.
Does that not kind of make it kind of counterintuitive if primarily we're going to be competing in longsword, but we're in off-season training with Dusak? Does that? So how do you feel like? What's that correlation?
The correlation is you're getting used to a faster stimulus response with the smaller weapons or the other weapons than you are with a weapon where you know the tempo.
Okay.
Because one of the main things that throws people off is a broken tempo with their opponent. So like they're rhythmically hitting you like 1, 2, 3, and then you're used to going 1, 2, 2, 3, and then like you're just moving all over the place, and that throws off fighters.
So you're saying the variety of practice gives you more tricks up your sleeve, even if you're not specifically practicing a longsword technique. Now, when you go back to longsword, your brain, to use my '60s jargon, you know, your mind has been expanded, and all of a sudden you're able to think outside of the normal longsword timing, maybe, or at least outside of what you're used to doing with a longsword. And
like with halberd or like pole arms, you're used to hits where you have to block with really good mechanics, because the weapons have such a forward balance that a block that would probably save your ass in longsword will get you killed with a halberd.
Oh my god.
So your blocking mechanics have to be on point. So then whenever you go from blocking with a halberd to now blocking with a longsword, you know exactly where to catch that sword so that there's no way they're going through your block.
So this is, for you, it's primarily a psychological training. It's not about the specific techniques or how they translate between each other, which, of course, they do. If you haven't trained cross weapons, you should, if only for seeing how they are similar and different. That is, by itself, valuable. But you're saying, for the training purposes, competitively, this is about mental space, not some kind of physical preparation.
Right, because at that point, it's just, whenever you're not getting ready for a tournament, it's about looking at things in different ways. Because this is the counterpoint. Once I'm getting ready for a competition, it's taking the many and carving it down to the few. There's a reason there's only like 5 Meisterhauen.
Sure.
And technically, Meyer breaks that down into like, all strikes fit into 3 categories. Like, it's about taking the complex and making it more caveman while maintaining the art of it.
So off-season is all about that expansive complexity and making sure that you're expanding your mind and all of those things. On season, we're of course focusing on whatever plays we're trying to play in tournaments and things like that. What's your transition look like?
Well, the first thing is I have to make sure I'm physically fit, and that
we'll come back to that.
Right.
We'll kind of gloss over that because I don't want to talk about that separate.
Yeah, because we'll talk about the 5 S's and stuff in a minute.
We'll
but
talk
like
about my cardio routine because that's fun to talk about.
Yeah. So like, whenever I'm going in, I start to like hone in on what's working for me this season. Because one of the things fighters get into a bad habit is they have a handful of tricks that are working for them at one point, and they stay in that comfort zone and not realizing as seasons go on, you get older, or just like your abilities change and your opponents change, you need to adapt. So like one season, it was crump out season. Like I was throwing crumps everywhere.
I think that was when you and I first started fighting. I remember that. Yeah.
I was just like everywhere. We're just like coming at it at weird angles.
It was annoying.
Yeah, because everyone, I went from like...
It was very effective. Like, that's...
Well, everyone in our training regiment got used to me doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
When I was in karate, I started doing karate. I had already had an experience in taekwondo, and I could do a spinning back kick very easily.
Oh, okay.
And I was nailing everyone with it. And then everyone went to the instructors, like, how do we deal with this? And then from then on, nobody could I hit with my spinning back kick because everyone got
so ready for it.
Yeah. But I know fighters who, like, once they hit that one thing, that's all they have. And so, you have to develop another tool for your toolkit that, like, okay, when A doesn't work, we move on to B. And then if B doesn't work, we move on to C. Or we have, I fight as a bully on this one, I fight as a lightweight on this one. So you had to diversify your approaches on how to fight people in order to basically keep winning, because you didn't want to get hit.
Because if you stagnate, the game will develop around you.
Yeah, and then everyone knows all your tricks, And that's one of the good things about training with people repetitively is once they know all your tricks, you have to come up with new ones.
Well, and I think this is a point worth mentioning. We've mentioned in a lot of our interviews, and we'll talk about it, and probably we'll devote entire episodes to it in the future because it's something that we should be talking about in HEMA significantly is, the gaming aspect of any tournament. Anytime you officially codify rules,
it's a game.
You create games.
Yeah.
Multiple. Like, at this point, we were... Yeah, and depending on the rule set, depends on what the game looks like, and everybody's trying to game it to win, or they're not, and that balance between playing that specific game versus showing your art is a very difficult thing. It's a difficult balance, right? But I think it's important to talk about how we find that balance between playing a game wherein we are successful, because of course we're competing, we want to be successful, we want to show our art in that way, and that is measured in, at least in part, by success in whatever game we enter into at that tournament.
Right.
But that I think maybe I'm wrong. Let's have some thoughts on it. I think that part of how you play games without compromising art in your practice is you don't let yourself stagnate. You don't let yourself create that annoying guy on Mortal Kombat who figures out the block kick and that's all he ever does, right? Like he just marches
jump, spin, kick, jump, spin, kick,
yes,
jump,
yeah,
spin,
whatever,
kick.
whatever the hell it was, that up, down, B or whatever in the Mortal Kombat that my brother always kicked my ass with. Right. Yeah, if you're just that guy, you can be annoying to entry-level fighters and can be absolutely decimated by anybody who knows what the hell you're doing because you have one trick. Now, it may be gamist and very successful in your opening pools or in lower levels, but you're not, first off, you're going to be playing a game that is not consistently successful, and you're not going to advance your art. So I think you're right, I think the trick is to be evolving that game, to be picking things that you are good at, to be picking things that you're going to practice and you're going to apply in tournaments, but choosing to constantly evolve that, either when forced to, because everybody figures out your game,
right?
Or, and I think this is the mark of a more advanced practitioner, when you realize you're stagnating, even before you start losing with it because people figure you out.
Right, and Joachim Meyer has the 4 types of fighters, and he literally divides everyone into, like, the stereotypes is like a berserker, a counter fighter, a person who will not attack unless they can get in and out safely, and then either the fool or the master who waits. If you look at Ronda Rousey was an Olympic-level judoka.
Right.
She became a UFC champion, and then Holly Holmes comes in and stomps her head in because she did not evolve her game.
Okay.
Matt Hughes did the same thing. He was a world-class wrestler, super strong, and even he'll admit, like, I didn't want to learn the other games. I just wanted to ground and pound, wrestle people, and that's it. When you limit your game to what you're good at and not willing to get outside that comfort zone, which there are strategies that we use and other people use and that I've used in other contexts to force that growth, and they are very painful, but you have to do it because if not, you walk up with one game. One of the things that we at Simbrogi and I have, like at other tournaments and whatnot, have been told, you pick up on my game very quickly because we are very much into notice pattern recognition. I understand what your game is, and then I adjust my game accordingly. You're a Zverkopter. You come in and you just want to go bah, 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 and hit me, right?
Are we naming names? Because I could call out
No.
right
like
now.
there's tons. That used to be like in the Nordic League was like the main strategy.
I know. Well, it's very common. When I started in, that was like a thing. I started fighting HEMA in 2018, and that was like one of the main things everybody was talking about at that time was getting away from that Zverkopter kind of thing.
Right. So we started using long point. We started cutting the arms. We started moving offline. We started using Unterhaus to counter it. And then that goes away. And then next season, you hear people going, oh, well, binding and winding is really big this season. Everyone's using shorter swords. They want to get in Krieg. They want to do close quarter. Then the next season's like, oh, well, everyone's like using Krumphaus this year. And like, it's a really big thing. It's like every season should have something different. And you yourself, every season, should be slightly different. You still have the other stuff you're good at. But you need to grow some new game or you're going to just stop.
Well, and I think it's probably worth noting, maybe a little bit off topic, and I apologize if we're rambling, but I think it's interesting. HEMA is a small enough community. Now, clearly, we have a lot of tournaments. We have a very thriving, active community I'm very grateful for, but let's not pretend it's bigger than it is. It's a small enough community that when, Simbrogi decides that we're going to focus on a couple of techniques for a season, for lack of a better term, and I'm not trying to be arrogant, I'm just using us as an example, it colors the Southern Historical Fencing League's tournaments for that season because clearly we're bringing that
Right.
what we've been working on there. And it takes when there's, I mean, what, the most fighters I've ever been at a tournament with is right around 100. Mm-hmm. I think that's the biggest tournament I've been to personally.
Yeah.
When there's only 100 fighters, if 20 of them are really focusing on a specific master cut, like you were saying, Crumb Pow or something like that, you're going to color the entire tournament. It's going to kind of skew that direction. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a lot of things defined by, were you good at that? Were you good at blocking that?
Were you good at countering that? Were you good at figuring out ways of throwing it or doing it that the other people aren't doing?
Right. Or did your game redefine even past, you got 20 of us coming up that have been practicing Crumb Pow for 3 months, but did you happen to practice something that just absolutely shuts us down on that? Mm-hmm. And that'll define not just your tournament, but especially those of us who fight 3 or 4 tournaments a year against each other in the same league. Like, you'll start defining.
Yeah, because if I know, like, we go down and we fight at Weird, by the time we hit Bro, people already have seen footage of us fighting. Right. And some of the people we fought at Weird, we're going to fight at Bro. And so they are already in their strategy of, we watched the footage, we kind of been talking. Some of them even reach out, like, what did you do? And it's like, I did X, Y, Z. So they're already making preparations. So those, if you're in, typically, like, we tend to get in the top 10 of events, people start to take notice of, like, hey, what are you doing? And, like, very much paying attention.
Well, but that's true the other way too. Like, when I watch people, fight at Weird and then fight at Bro, and I see kind of the same strategies and it's working and it's tearing my game apart, I sit up and pay attention. Like, I mean, I'm going to see them again in the fall sometime at Gesselfesten or something like that.
Yeah, you adapt to the new technology. And those who don't adapt, it's the survival of the adaptation. I mean, like, there's a reason why people started cramming armor on their asses, because, like, they don't want to die to some guy who, like, has a spear. So
yeah, it's kind of just natural evolution of the
because
sport.
Where we are, like, we're 5 evolutions in, someone else may be on their first, and so, like, that's where it is. So
that's interesting.
But that's the whole point of, like, you go from something very broad, you're looking at things from different angles with no concept of being competitive with it. Like, when I go and spar in off season, I don't care if I lose.
Right, because that's not the game we're playing.
Right. My goal is to go out there and, like, I'm going to do a suppressing cut to a thrust from below on a guy, and that's all I'm going to do. I don't care what he does. I'm going to put my thing in Tog. I'm going to do a Dimf How. I'm going to suppress or cut down, come up with a point, and get them.
Yeah, it's probably worth interjecting and talking about for just a second kind of that off-season mentality. And it shifts. Like, I kind of think of it in 3 phases. I think of my tournament training in 3 phases. I have my off-season, when I'm not actually actively preparing for any specific combat or any specific competition. I have my transition time when I'm shifting from off-season
building
up to, which is mostly about cardio,
attribute
building, that kind of a thing. And then I have during competition season when I'm,
maintenance,
when I'm fighting in Weird and then going down to South Texas for their tournaments and, all, it's kind of all a whole bunch of things a couple months in a row, and there's not really a lot of time between.
It's almost like a medieval, it's a tour of force. It's almost like a campaign where it's like we're jumping from event to event.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's worth noting that I think one of the keys to success is changing your mindset in the off season. And maybe this is a tangent. This is a tangent, but this is important to me, so I'm going to talk about it for a minute. I think way too many fighters and this is an overarching concern, but way too many fighters put way too much emphasis on ego all the time. But I want to talk specifically for a minute about how that affects your off-season training. If you try to train in the off-season the same way you fight in a tournament, you're going to stagnate. Yeah. Because if it's all about winning, I'm always going to default to the things I'm good at. For me, I have I'm not a big dude. I have a little bit of speed under my belt that I feel pretty proud of. And I can have a lot of effectiveness with jumping off the starting line, lots of feints, a lot of quick, deceptive cuts that are going somewhere you're not expecting them to, which is fun, and I enjoy it, and I am pretty successful at it. If during the off season all I care about is winning, I'm going to lean on that and never learn anything new.
Right, because you're going to keep to the things that
I'm going to keep to the things that are going to work for me. But I have to be willing to, and this is always so telling when you're at practice, and so this is, I'm going to make it very personal, so I'm not calling anybody out, but like when I take my mental attitude and drop it back out of my ego and fix my own shit, you know? And I'm like, no, I really need to work on my master cuts. I really need to make sure that I am finding those transition points, being aware of my opponent's movements, and interrupting their timing, which is not my strong suit.
Right.
When I do that, my level of success just plummets because that's not my strong suit. And I'm trying to work on it.
These are low percentiles you're trying to raise up.
But off season is when that should be happening, and I need to not be caring. Like you say, you don't care about when you win, and I mean, generally overall, that's probably true. I know that's not always true. We always get in our head sometimes and want to win every sparring match, but we should strive for that attitude of I am working on a skill. And even if that newling who's only been here for 3 weeks beats my ass in a spar, like, yes, that should be your off-season goal, is to get your ass beat at things you're not good at until you get better at them.
Yeah.
You know, and if you can separate, and this is important to me, if you can, during that off-season type of training, separate your ego enough that you can take a newling out onto the sparring floor, try something completely new for you, and be willing to fail at it miserably and spectacularly against a newling so that you can learn. I mean, that's what you got to be doing.
I would say you can tell when your ego death is full is whenever it's not a newling. It's a guest from somewhere else.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because...
That's a good point.
Let's put it this way. After, I think it was Gesellfechten 2018 or something like that, we had a bunch of people stay over on Sunday, and we did Blossfechten with no gear. And so I'm fighting Anthony Bonomo. Sorry, Anthony, I fucked it up again.
Oh, do we have a cat in the shot?
Cat in the shot! I know.
That's Guinevere, y'all. So she says hi, apparently.
I'm fighting Anthony in no gear, and I'm fighting completely differently than I did during the tournament.
Yeah. That's how it goes.
Because we have no gear on, and it changes the game.
Well, and you're not playing that game anymore. Now it's training.
Yeah, it's back to training.
Right.
And if my goal was just to do the same thing I did the other day, well, there's nothing I'm going to gain out of that.
No, there's no.
And I'm cool. Every time he beats me on something, it's like, cool. I'm just going to try to like figure out how he got me or how I'm screwing the technique up, and just take it from there. It comes down to, am I willing to be uncomfortable? Because the cool thing about kickboxing, whenever I did kickboxing all the time, is there's no declared winner when you spar kickboxing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because you just go out there and you hit each other.
Well, I mean, that's generally true in HEMA too, isn't it? I don't know that I've ever been in a sparring match where...
I think we disengage that and we go, whenever we're sparring, we want to feel like we won that match. Where it's like, in kickboxing, it's like, I'm working on low kicks.
Oh, you're saying that there's not even that feeling of, oh, I got you, let's reset.
Right. It's just continuous. Okay. Like, oh, I got you in the leg. Well, while I was working, like, leg kicks, you punched me in the face. Like, oh, yeah, cool, that's going to happen. Because I'm not even worrying about my face right now. I'm just worrying about that low kick.
Well, kickboxing is a scoring system, right?
It's per hits.
Yeah.
So, like, some of them are weighted differently, but it's like boxing. It's just continuous.
Sure.
So the idea with that, or like Carlos Machado, which is like one of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys that's really big, him and the Machado brothers. I went to a seminar for him, and he's like, do you train for a championship match by every day fighting the championship match? And he's like, if you do that, you will die.
Well, yeah. It's kind of like you can only train at 100% once.
Yeah. It's like, you will get a handful of like 100% matches between now and then, but everything is supposed to be like a build-up until the fights, and when the fights happen, then you're exercising your 100% abilities.
Nice. Okay.
But you shouldn't do that every single time you're going into the gym.
Clearly
because
not.
Yeah. And this is a good way to segue into like attributes, because one of the things that people get into whenever they're getting ready for a fight is they neglect the road work, pad work for sparring. Because maybe they're new to it, or maybe they don't have a diverse range of training tools. And so like I typically go off of, I got it from Dan Inosanto. I think he got it from James Wong, the 5 S's of sport combat.
Okay, yeah, this is one of my favorite topics and something I want to talk about extensively. Let's go.
Right, because James broke it into, there are 5 attributes if you're doing sports combat that in order would essentially be like how you take this very big diverse thing and put it into steps.
Okay.
To
and
organize
those
it.
5 S's are?
The first one is speed.
Okay.
Then it is strength, stamina, strategy, and then spirit. Okay? The idea, with speed, the stereotype for it is I am fast enough that you cannot defend against me, I will win.
Yeah, it's kind of an auto win condition.
Auto win. I can come in, hit you, and you cannot stop me because I'm so
if
fast.
by default your strike is faster than my block,
I win.
it's over. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So that attribute can be very hard for people to build because when I was wearing a Superman suit with a black belt tied around my waist, we would talk about fast muscle twitch fibers. Anytime someone's wearing a Superman suit and a karate belt or whatnot, I tend to not believe their medical knowledge because
Okay, all right. That seems like another topic we probably shouldn't get into, but all right, go on.
But as a sports psych and a psychology background, it's stimulus response is all you're doing.
Right. Well, it's conditioned responses, right?
Right. Yeah. So
Which is
as
what
soon
training
as
is at any level.
and like it's me going from here to doing a number one or a right overhow and hitting the target as fast as I see the opening. That needs to be the first thing you train, and it's not even like the covering afterwards. It's just like get to target as fast as you see the opening. And it's like drag racing. It's like as soon as the light hits green, you hit it. And you don't worry about recovery. And that's where people need to start, but then they have to do the secondary part is once you hit, then exit. And you need to do that to a stimulus and a response. Stimulus, response.
Right.
So one of the ways we used to do that in kickboxing, we'd have numbers like 1's a jab, 2's a jab cross, 3's a jab cross.
Yeah. This is I still use this for my cardio because you taught it to me.
So we'd be like, all right, we're doing 1s for 2 minutes, and every time you hear you're going to fire it. And you're going to move around constantly. And every time you hear the stimulus, you fire it. Right?
Okay.
So we'd be moving around, and then the timing's going to start getting ripped off.
Right.
And then I'm going to throw it twice, and we just keep going. And then I'll throw things in there like sprawl. And what the idea is just building in that, like, as soon as you hear the bell, you go. As soon as you see the opening, you fire. That is the first version of speed to train.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it is one where if you're really good at it, a lot of people who are like whips, like lighter weight people, tend to be faster at it.
Yeah, the speed is not something I have to work very hard to train.
Right. As soon as I see an opening, I fire. I'm light. I'm quick. I go at it.
The noticing the openings takes a lot of training for me. But you're right. Like my natural stats lend me towards that speed. That's true. That's true.
Yeah, and you can do that with bag work, with someone yelling. You can set up a timer that randomly beeps at you or something. And then you can build that into, like, it's a combo. So I throw a right overhow, right Zverkow, left Zverkow as I leave, and then I move around, and then I do it again, and then I do it again, and then I do it again.
Well, and for practical tips, I'll talk in a minute here, because I kind of combine speed training and stamina training together.
So no matter what you do.
When we get down to stamina, I'll talk about that.
Right. So then the second type of speed is combination speed, which for most people, and for, like, the German system, is built into it with experience. Because the first type of speed, Ringek talks about, like, you hit Zufect and you fire right overhow, and if you hit them, you kill them instantly, you win.
Yeah, this is your first win condition.
Yeah, my first win condition is as soon as I hit the starting line, which is hopefully further out than they're expecting.
Correct.
I whack them in
their
opening.
Which is about knowing your distance, knowing your measure, for sure.
Right. And I fire at one of the 4 openings strongly and hard, typically a right overhow to their left opening right here. After that's the combination speed, which is the binding, the winding, the disengaging and hitting, that kind of thing.
Which in my experience is more about muscle memory.
Yeah.
And keeping that smoothest, what is that? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast?
Fast is smooth, smooth is fast.
Other way around. Yeah. But yeah, that idea, that being willing to train in such a way that your muscle memory is good enough that you've built your speed through practice.
Boom. Right. And then, like, you hit a hard bind, what do we do? I hit a soft bind, what do I do? And then building that where you get a stimulus, which is you get your opening, you fire, and then that's your initial, and then you have your follow-up combos basically set in your brain.
So, well, you can talk about this as we go, but so specifically on speed, what are some recommendations you have for practical physical training of of speed?
Get a longsword, get a pill, and have somebody the first thing to do is just start static. You're right there. And then when someone goes 1, or they yell, or they tap their foot, they move their hand toward an opening, something like that, you hit it. And then you do that for like 2 minutes. So like every time you're just waiting because you're just getting used to getting off the starting line.
Okay.
Over and over again. Once somebody's good at that, they start moving. And then the person's firing yet again randomly. And then you have them moving through guards and firing it as well. then the next skill is add in a combo. So it's like Ober, Unter, Zwerg. Move. Ober, Unter, Zwerg. Or Ober, boom, boom, boom. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's I build in a combo, and then as they're moving around for like a 2-minute kickboxing round, every time they hear the stimulus, they fire.
Nice.
Or they yell at a number, or they yell at a box, and then you attack that with your combo.
Now, I do a lot, I'm going to jump in with kind of a slightly different perspective and a recommendation for solo practitioners. I do most of my speed training solo, especially this year, Jesus.
Yeah.
I haven't been, because of my job, I haven't had the ability, unfortunately, to go and train in larger groups and things like that.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a crap ton
At
of
home.
solo work this year especially, but even before that I get a lot of my conditioning solo. And I use bag work to work speed significantly, and what I'll do is every day I'll pick a couple of combos, and not always with the sword. I do rounds, we'll talk about this more when we talk about stamina too, but I do bag rounds with just like kickboxing gloves, and I do kicks, strikes, and I don't use my actual longsword, my steel longsword on the bag, but I have a synthetic longsword.
I mean, that's recommended. So
that I
you don't
use
tear
on
your
the
bag
bag.
up.
Right, exactly. I don't want to buy another bag every 2 or 3 months. So I use the synthetic on the bag, but I'll pick, when I go out and do my cardio, I do it as part of my cardio, which is why it's also stamina, but I will pick a couple of combos and I'll cycle through them during my cardio rounds. And I always start them very slow, trying to get that smoothness and all of that. And then my goal every time is I count how many times I hit my combo in a single round. And I'm trying to increase that number.
Right.
And it's just very, almost like I mean, it is a gym routine, but almost more like a weightlifting
Yeah, I mean, it is.
mentality where I'm like, I'm not trying to up my reps by 300. I'm trying to get 1 or 2 more this round than I got last time.
And in kickboxing, we used to do like, if you were doing hands only, you would have to do 200 hits in like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And then your goal was to keep pushing that number. And eventually you get to where it's like 210. That was 5 more. So awesome.
Yeah.
Because I was doing 205 beforehand.
So to look at the camera and give like an actual recommendation, if you are wanting to improve your speed as you're prepping for competition, or just to improve your art in general, a really easy way to do that is if you don't have a bag, you can use a corner of a wall with some very basic, like honestly, my kickboxing gloves are like $10 Walmart.
You can use a telephone pole out back.
Use a telephone pole out back. You can use a corner in your living room, whatever you've got. It doesn't have to be specific gear, but the idea is you want to be, for a set amount of time, doing a specific thing that you are trying to dial in your muscle movements so that it's as smooth, efficient, and as effective as possible. And you judge that by counting how many times you get your combo off. And it's a very specific thing you're practicing. You're not trying to be adaptable in this moment. You're not trying to be reading an opponent, because it is a bag. You are working your combos in your ideal scenario where you get to fire off everything you want in a row, assuming no objections from your opponent.
Right.
How smooth and thereby how fast can you be? So that's a really good way to work your speed up, which also plays into stamina, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
So the second S.
Second S is strength. And this is the part where I get some blowback from people, because strength is important. You know, mass times acceleration equals force. So acceleration is the speed. Mass, how big I am, or how much torque I can put on that thing. So it's like, you have to, like, the manuals were written for people who were roughly the same size, because they were dueling people who are about the same size as them. When you look at manuals, a lot of times they're almost exactly the same height.
Completely off topic, but I'm a nerd, so let's go. Do you think that's an artifact of, do we have more diversity in body size and things like that in HEMA today than you think they had in medieval times?
Medieval times, you're looking at if it's early, this is the creme de la creme of warrior society. Like, all these guys are going to be tall, they're going to be muscular, they're going to be well fed.
I see what you're saying.
And they want to be the big ass kicker, right? And
we're talking about different body sizes and strength, and how much actual just physical raw I can flex strength, affects things. So the manuals assume 2 opponents of roughly the same body type, just from a historical necessity. That was who was fighting at the time.
Right, because if you are, let's use the generic term, a knight, right, or a man-at-arms. If you were born and bred into that warrior lifestyle, your nutrition was superior, your training was going to be superior. There's pictures of them like exercising with weights and jumping off pommel horses and doing acrobatics.
The same way a professional athlete today, like, yeah, sure, there's some variety in body type depending on what specifically they're doing, but you're talking about people who won the genetic lottery to begin with. Yeah.
Or at least the societal lottery of...
Sure, yeah.
Here I am with all the nutrients and education factors and health providing. I mean, Henry V got shot in the face with a fucking arrow, and they built a device to extract it out of his face.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that story. That's true.
Like, these are people who have a leg up anyway.
So, but clearly that's not true in 2020 HEMA. We're dealing with a much wider variety of body types and sizes and... even physical accessibility.
I mean, you have someone who's 5 foot, 120 pounds, soaking wet in all their gear, with weights in their pockets.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus Legault, who is 6'4", 6'6", and probably close to 280, 290.
Big boy.
Big boy. Like when he uses a Pavlov.
Intimidating to face off against.
Yeah. So it's more of an egalitarian in that we all can like fight each other, but the problem is when you're reading a strategy book based off of one set of people, that is based off the idea that a lot of these attributes are the same. So if you are going to train to fight someone bigger, being stronger makes... One of my favorite quotes is, stronger people are harder to kill and in general more useful. You have to have strength because you need it to move your weapon faster, longer, and... You will never get a hard bind if you can't outstrength some people. If you are both binding equally.
Okay, so let's talk about this specifically. We're clearly dealing with scenarios where you're not necessarily the same body type, same weight class kind of a thing. So you've got a fighter who's 120 pounds, and you've got a fighter who's 250 pounds. Even at roughly equal skill levels, the strength, the size, and weight differential there has to play into a certain extent, even if the weapon's the great equalizer.
If the weapon is the great equalizer, it's who can hit who fastest with being able to escape. So, like, the speed's still the same thing, because once you put sharp swords into it, if we go out there, right, and I am the lumbering giant and you're the little person, right? You beat me off the starting line, you hit me, and then you're out of range before I can hit you back. You are going to win the scenario. So
describe to me then, and maybe you and I aren't quite enough of a disparity to make this work, but since we're the ones on camera, let's talk about that. You do more strength training than I do, which I think is true in general.
Yeah.
Because I do focus more on the speed. But so I'm going up against you. If you and I were to just have a shoving match, I'm gonna lose,
right?
And I do when we wrestle. I have to work particularly hard to out-muscle you.
I outweigh you, and
you outweigh me. You outlift me. You strength train more than I do. So yeah, so it has to be about skill, which is what you just described with attaching the speed to it. What incentive do I have? Or maybe a better way to ask that question is, what should I be specifically training strength-wise to make my strength what it should be to fight an opponent like you?
So the number one thing that you should train is, they call them the top 3s or the top 5s. Like if I could pick exercises, right? Deadlift for a human being strengthens everything but the muscles to push shit over your head and pull yourself up.
Okay.
All your strikes come through your core. Unless you're a terrible fighter, because you have to do rotation. You have to have leg strength and everything. If you're going to end up in a high bind situation, you're using your entire body.
Right.
So you have to have a strong body in general. If you're going to pick someone up and throw them, anything like that, you need to just have, in general, strength. Once you're done with being good at doing like deadlifts, you need to do overhead work like military presses or halos or single arm press. Because then you're dealing with like longsword work, where I'm pushing the weapon out at people, or I'm doing a high bind. And then after that, it's just pull-ups, because then you need to have the other, where it's like I have to be able to pull down or pull on an opponent. Once you have those 3 types of athletic movement down really well and strong, and all your joints are in alignment, and you're able to exert more of your strength and influence, you're going to do better than everyone who isn't doing that. Because the idea is, if we're equal in speed, we're going to end up in a bind.
Okay.
Because eventually we will not be able to get through the other person's defenses. We're going to end up on top of each other.
So your feelings And I mean, for the sake of the camera, I'm playing dumb on some things that we've clearly talked about significantly, but I think Kyle explains them well, so I'm going to pester him with the questions to explain it to you guys. You feel like this is kind of a cascading list of the 5 S's.
It's supposed to be.
We're going to assume if we can get the better speed training, we're going to beat our opponent. But if they can match us at that, now it comes down to strength. If they can match us at strength,
then we go on.
Now it's going to come down to stamina.
Right.
Stamina to remind me.
Strategy
To spirit.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're cascading here, and strength is that second line of defense. If we can't beat them in speed, we have to at least be able to match them.
Can't kill them at range. You got to be able to beat them up close.
Nice.
And
example.
The stronger opponent will typically win out, even if they're at a lower skill.
Okay.
Because they just have. I mean, that's why Matt Hughes won for years. He could just outstrength people.
Interesting.
And he literally would say that. It's like, I can choose between skill and strength. I choose strength. Multi-champion.
Cool.
Until he ran into someone who was just as strong as him, but it could outlast him, had a better strategy. George St. Pierre.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move down the list one, since I want to talk about the.
Okay.
I think they're in 2 chunks, and I'm gonna talk about that extensively in a second. But let's hear you talk about stamina first, and then I'm gonna give my little spiel.
So stamina, the idea if we're equal in speed, we're equal in strength, it's who can outlast the other person. Because this is a sporting event, no one dies.
Right, clearly.
It's who can go the distance. Now,
yeah, because if I get hit in the head in a tournament, if it's 14-20, I'm going down and it's over. But if I get hit in the head in a tournament and it's 20-20, I'm going back to my starting line and I got to do it again.
Got to do it again. All right. So it's who goes the longest. And there's 2 types of cardio. There's aerobic and anaerobic.
Sure.
Everyone starts at anaerobic if you're out of shape because you can't suck enough wind in. And then eventually you move into aerobic.
Which was me in 2018.
And then you go into the other spectrum of you try to push yourself enough that you're getting back into anaerobic. Because fighting is mostly anaerobic. So that to me is one of the most important attributes to get to because as my kickboxing coach put it, you can be fast, you can hit hard. But because there's weight classes in kickboxing, you both hit and move about the same. You hit about the same hard, and you're just about the same fast. Who has the bigger gas tank to do that longer?
Right.
And in a tournament HEMA tournaments take 6 hours or more.
And you're fighting for a lot of it.
Or you're sitting on your ass and you have to recover. So your ability to go hard, recover is very important. And doing that in HEMA without injuring yourself can be tricky.
So what is your favorite way to train stamina? We've talked about speed and strength. What is your favorite way to train stamina?
Kickboxing and grappling.
Kickboxing and grappling.
Because kickboxing is HEMA is asymmetrical. I'm right-handed. I'm primarily utilizing different muscle groups for my strikes.
Right.
With single-handed weapons, I can switch, but yet again, it's overworking a side of my body a lot. Kickboxing, when I'm using more of my body to kick the bag and grab the bag and knee and then punch.
Right.
So it activates more cardio, more anaerobic, faster. Grappling is like weight training while fighting. So you're getting a lot of muscle movement. You're dealing with having to move stuff that sometimes doesn't move. And overall, it just builds up your cardio very quickly. It's why it's in the sources they say to wrestle.
To wrestle constantly, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the core of the art because of that. Because let's say we're in 15th century Europe, we're going to spar. We could never or very rarely spar full contact or what we full on high speed
as hard as you'd go, right?
With
100%.
a blunt sword because I might kill you by accident.
Right.
But I can spar pretty much full out with wrestling.
That's true. Yeah. No, I can see your point. So you actually get that more intense cardio training, much better stamina from it.
Mm-hmm. And you're not...
Well, partially because there's not that worry that you're even going to put a blunt steel sword through somebody's, vertebrae if you hit too hard. But also you have, just by the nature of the game, in fencing, once I get that hit...
It's over.
We got to consider it over and we should move on. Whereas in wrestling, it takes longer to get to that spot. If you're fighting somebody that's roughly your skill level, even when you get to that spot, you've got to hold it. You've got to maintain that control, do something with it. So yeah, I think I can see that. I can see that as a just overarching principle. Sparring and wrestling is going to give you more straight up physical exercise benefits than sparring with a blade.
Right.
That makes sense to me.
If we're working on stamina, because when we are fighting, we are
or strength. I would argue same thing.
Because whenever, this is the thing, people are like, I need to do a lot of sparring rounds. And it's like, if that's how you gain cardio, you're not doing it right. That is skill development, that is range management, that's me applying my art. If you're trying to get tired while sparring, you're going to get sloppy, and you're training yourself to fight sloppy.
Yeah, okay.
When you spar, it needs to be short, acute, to the point, an A-level effort, and then recover, just like you would at a competition.
Okay. That makes sense. So this is, I think, a good spot to kind of pause and talk about, this episode's really about the 5 S's. Like, realistically, when we're talking about training and we're talking about preparing for tournaments, probably because you are my primary training partner and we have worked together so much, like I have adopted that 5 S's philosophy from you. So that's kind of what you and I practice. So it's our recommendation. We recommend that you think about it this way. And I think it's helpful to think of it in 2 chunks. The first 3 that we just talked about are kind of one set of things that we train together. And then the last 2, the strategy and spirit, are kind of the second set that we think of and train together. So before we get into the more psychological aspects of it with strategy and spirit, I want to stop and talk really practically about how much the first 3 S's impact tournaments, and also kind of how you can tie them together for training in some really practical ways. So story time, because it'll help with some context. I started fighting HEMA in January of 2017, 2018, right after I had spent a year losing 60 pounds. I was 260 pounds in January of 2017. I was 200 pounds in January of 2018, but I wasn't, so I was newly physically active. and I never played sports as a kid. I never took even, McDojo karate lessons, nothing like that. I was brand new to anything physical, brand new when I started HEMA. So I had to learn habits and exercises and all of that. And so I have a little bit of advantage, just quite honestly, because my entire contextual setting is HEMA.
Right.
I don't have... It's also a little bit of a disadvantage because I don't have any background to draw off of. I don't have any other experience, but it's nice because I get to focus. But I want to say all of that because this makes sense. I practiced HEMA very casually in 2018. I went to one local tournament and I was just wildly excited that I wasn't last in my pool. You know what I'm saying? And I went once a week and kind of played at the sword, mostly long sword, some dagger. And that was kind of it for 2018. And then in 2019, I decided this is super fun. I want to take this seriously. I tried out for the Simbrogi tournament team and made it, which was honestly, just a big life moment for me, which we can talk about in other episodes. But that's when I decided to start taking it seriously. And I immediately, before I was even officially on the tournament team, I went to Weird Open 2019, which was a phenomenal tournament. Great experience that I just... in my longsword pool sucked at. I had a bad longsword tournament. It was really poor, even though I felt like I'd been practicing, I felt like I'd been working. I did not perform in longsword nearly as much as I should. So we came back to Oklahoma City and I decided, nope, I'm on the tournament team now. I'm going to take this seriously. I need a plan. And you and I sat down and talked about what should be different from how I've been training to how I should train if I'm going to take competition seriously.
Right.
And here's what I did. Here's what changed. And I went and didn't even make elims at Weird 2019 in January. And then in April, I went to Showdown in O-Town and took second place in the open division, which I was wildly proud of. And there's a huge amount of technique practice that happened between January and April. But what happened is in February, I created a regimen for the first 3 S's. Yep. And that was a daily thing for me. And I started, and I'll just briefly describe it because I think this is a huge difference. A huge difference. If you sit there and commit to, I'm going to do things to improve my speed, I'm going to do things to improve my strength, and I'm going to do things to improve my stamina. This makes a huge difference in the competition. And I'm going to use my story as an example. January to April in a single year is not enough time that I got that much better at the sword.
Right.
I didn't. But what I did is I conditioned myself, because 3 months, you can get a lot of conditioning in if you focus. So what I started doing is I started lifting 4 or 5 days a week, but not very long. I was doing big muscle group things, overhead press, deadlifts, squats, just enough that I was intentionally upping my numbers on my big motor skills strength. And then I started, instead of doing cardio that was an hour-long medium level, like what I had been doing when I lost all of my weight, I started doing burst cardio. And this was, you're nodding along, but like you helped me come up with this plan. We kind of
we were doing
anaerobic
together. Short sprint work on the bag and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so for those couple of months, what I was doing is every morning before work, I was getting up and downing coffee like it was shots and going to the gym and lifting for not very long, about 20 minutes. Every morning I would go lift. Very basic stuff, just enough to make sure I was improving.
Yeah, because it was low rep, high strength.
Correct.
High weight, so that way because it's the big muscle movement, the bigger and more weight you can move, the faster you can move lighter weight.
Right, and so when I was strength training 4 or 5 days a week, I was not focusing on anything but can I improve my numbers? Can my max, my personal record go up today? And I only had, I have trouble remembering exactly what it was off the top of my head, but I had like 5 exercises I rotated between, and I do 3 of them every day. Yeah. And that was it. That was all I did. And I quickly went from deadlifting, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I improved my deadlift by 100 pounds over the course of that 3 months. Like it was significant.
And I mean, in some retrospects, you improved your deadlift the amount of a person.
Right. So then, just when my bind work just immediately, it was immediately better because the number of people who could force me out of a hard bind dropped just very quickly. So I would do that for strength training, and then I would combine my speed and stamina with kickboxing rounds. And Kyle and I worked together because this was your recommendation, was to use the kickboxing, and I'm wildly happy with it now. But he taught me the combos he was talking about, the 1-1-2 with the kicks and all of that. And I worked very hard to get it smooth, and then all I would do is I would do 2-minute rounds. Well, it started at 2-minute rounds, and we'll talk about transitioning probably here in a minute. But with 2-minute rounds, as hard as I could go, as many hits on that bag as I could get with my different combos. And I would run kickboxing for 2 minutes, 3 or 4 times in a row. I'd pull out the synthetic sword and do combos with that for 2 or 3 minutes in a row, and never more than 1 minute off in between rounds. Right. So I was getting a half hour, 40 minutes of cardio, because I would do, 10 or 12 rounds with 1 minute breaks. And what happened is not only did my stamina just generally get better because I was doing cardio 5 days a week. Any cardio you can do is going to help. But specifically, this is cardio that is analogous, for lack of a better word.
We call it sports specific.
Okay, there you go. That's a good term for it. Sports specific to what I was going to be doing. Because when I went down to Showdown in No Town, I only had to exert energy for a couple of minutes. That's it. I had to be able to rest, get my air back, go back in the ring. Rest, get my air back, go back in the ring. And I had to be able to burst cardio like that. And so training what I was expecting to perform made a huge difference. So now I have a routine that's upping my raw strength with lifts, that is specifically targeting cardio and stamina that's going to apply to a tournament setting,
right?
While also encouraging that muscle memory for the speed with my longsword combos. And I would argue, I'm not the sports medicine guy, but I would argue even the kickboxing drastically improves how my work with a longsword or a dagger.
And the good thing about kickboxing, I'm going to throw this out there, is we always talk about the 80-20 split. I do 80% of this, I do 20% of that, or I get 80% of my gains from this 20. Longsword is mostly upper body. Weapons are mostly upper body.
Very much so.
And you can get tendinitis, as you well know.
As I have right now. I haven't worked out in 2 weeks because it's hurting.
By overworking your upper body. So you primarily do kicks. You can get a massive amount of cardio, and both aerobic and anaerobic, just by doing kickboxing rounds where 80% of it's kicks. Yeah. Like you could do like French Savate rounds where it's like combos with your lead leg and stuff like that. And in general, if the first 3, because they're their own separate beast. Now, I would argue it's also 3 parts, like the strategy and the spirit thing's separate.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a minute.
In general, I think what we're trying to say is if you become a better athlete, your athletic expression, no matter what, will increase.
Okay. I can see that.
Because martial arts is a form of athletic expression. It's a violent form of athletic expression.
Yeah.
I mean, so if I'm faster than you, awesome. I can win a lot.
You're at some point, whatever strategy you're using, whatever we're talking about with art and technique, at some point, I have to physically beat my opponent. So even the mental aspects should be pointing back to, can I physically be superior to my opponent in this?
Yeah.
And clearly, like, we're all artists here. We talk in our interviews, we talk a lot about focusing on art and mentality and not letting it be all about winning, which I'm 100% here for. And I mean, it's a weakness of mine. I'm a competitive person. I always want to win. But it is. We do obviously care about that. But at the end of the day, this is a podcast about competitive HEMA. And while we want to showcase our art and we want to be wildly good sports about every competition we're in, why the hell would we be in a competition if we didn't want to win?
Exactly.
And we should be talking about that.
Yeah, because that's the main point of going to a competition is you want to see how well you can express your art. And you cannot, I can't remember the Socrates quote about like wrestling, but you cannot express your art to its fullest potential if you physically do not have the attributes to do what your mind is wanting you to do.
Yeah.
So
to wrap this up, my official recommendation, the Fighting Words podcast recommendation, is that you use timed kickboxing rounds to train your speed and stamina, because it is wildly effective. So you should be our official recommendation, with some success in tournaments under our belts collectively. I feel like you more than I, but I'm getting there. I've got a couple nice medals on the wall in the other room. You should be working on those three in a very practical, physical training way. If you feel like you study well, if you feel like you train well with your club and your school, which I'm sure you do. I mean, I've never visited a club that I've not been impressed by their training techniques. They're often different than ours, but it's always interesting. That's great. And if you're hitting a wall when you go to competitions because you can fight, but you're just not competing against the top tier fighters that you feel like you should be able to, man, make a change on these first three S's. Game changing.
Buy yourself a bag, or buy yourself a pair of Thai pads and some boxing gloves and maybe some wraps, and learn a little bit of how to do basic kick. You just need the basics of it in order to do bag rounds. You don't need to worry about anything else but like how to do it safely to not hurt your joints, and then do it as a form of conditioning. And one of the things is that if you get good at it, you're not afraid of going the distance with people.
Yeah, and honestly, just training kickboxing for cardio, for stamina and speed like I have, I've seen that improvement, and this is controversial, so y'all can bring me at the stake if you want, but because I don't have any other martial arts background than HEMA, that has been hugely helpful in my grappling game. Like, simply practicing the basic body movements that are jabs, crosses, and combos like that, using my feet, using my knees, and getting that speed built up and that muscle memory. I find myself, and I think you can attest to this since we train together so much, like, once I started getting more familiar with that, my body mechanics in wrestling just skyrocketed.
You train body mechanics, you get better at body mechanics.
Yeah, and I think there's no negative to it. You're not going to hurt your dagger or wrestling techniques, or especially not your longsword techniques, because you're also practicing different movements that you may not use specifically. You're going to teach your body to move in effective ways. You're going to teach your body and your brain to communicate better in the moment, and it's constantly good.
More time on the mat is more time on the mat.
Yeah, even if it's just on a bag and you're just playing metal in your ears and
you're
going.
Still putting reps in. You got to get to your 10,000 reps to get to your mastery.
Yeah, and so I want to talk real briefly. About kind of how I changed that when I'm transitioning to get ready for a tournament, which I've been really successful with over the last year or so. So when I'm just maintaining and practicing, I do 2-minute rounds for my cardio, and I do it at least 5 days a week. That's kind of my if I can get my ass up and go to work 5 days a week, I can get my ass up and do cardio 5 days a week.
Right.
I kind of feel like that's true. Not always the same 5 days. I'm not a schedule guy, but I kind of have check boxes and make sure I get 5 days a week of a half hour at least of cardio on the bag, and that's my primary way. When I am, and then the other thing I do is during the down season is I run, and I never run for very far. I'm not sitting here trying to get 10 miles or run a half marathon or anything like that, because again, I want to be practicing and training things that are going to be analogous, sport specific to what I'm doing. And running is not sport specific, but what running does for me is if I have, a maximum 2-mile route that I'm running, and I'm not going for land speed, I'm going for keeping my heart rate up for a more prolonged period of time. So once every 4 or 5 days, instead of doing the bag work, I'll run, and I'll keep my heart rate up for, I'll go 2 miles and be running for 16 or 17 minutes. Not breaking land speed records, not trying to impress anybody with my speed, but just trying to make sure that more than just 2 minutes at a time, I can keep at least a moderate level of cardio going longer than that. Then when I start getting ready for a tournament, I drop the running. The running is the first thing that goes because it's not practical for the tournament. And if I've kept it up during my off season, then I've got my baseline stamina that I'm building off of. And what I'm trying to build off of on that stamina is I want to go from 2-minute bag rounds as intense as I can up to 3-minute bag rounds as intense as I can. And I do it slowly. Over a couple of weeks, I'll go up, 10 or 15 seconds.
Yeah, 15 seconds is usually...
Yeah, 15-second intervals are pretty nice. So for a week, I'll do 2 minutes and 15 seconds, then 2.5 minutes. And eventually, the goal is 5 days a week, I'm doing 10 3-minute rounds of kickboxing or sword work as fast, as smooth, as intense as I can, so that my body is by the time I go to the tournament and I get my adrenaline up and I set myself on the line ready to go, from a cardio and stamina and speed perspective, my body's ready to give it everything it's got for 3 minutes straight before I'm done. And that's kind of the progression I take on that. I also drop my strength training down when I'm getting ready for a tournament. Instead of doing the 5 or 4 days a week lifting, I'll go ahead and drop that down to almost nothing.
Yeah, because you're putting more draw on the body. So, like, in off season, we can work on getting those numbers as high as possible. But as we increase cardiovascular, we're putting more strain on the central nervous system. So we have to withdraw back somewhere. And usually that's going to be strength training, because the goal is we've been maintaining or getting our strength as high as possible. Now it's putting that strength to use. So I don't have to be deadlifting 300 pounds when I go into my dill. But if I was deadlifting 300 pounds twice a week, I was maintaining some of that neurological strength. Right. Even if you're doing it once or twice a week before the tournament, you're still maintaining your strength, but you have to divert some of that central nervous system energy to cardio, to game, to this other stuff. You only have so many things you can do. You have to...
Yeah. So what I do is, like, I think of it as off-season transition, and then...
Yeah, once you're on-season.
So during the off-season, I focus more on strength than any other time. And then during transition is actually when I do the least strength training. Because during off-season, it's strength speed primarily, with kind of a stamina minor. During my transition times, I shift that down the 5 S's, and I'm primarily working stamina and strategy with a minor in speed. And I'm not really focusing on the strength.
You don't have to worry as much about speed because that's your core. You're already good at that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the way I run that, is I jump into higher amounts of cardio burst like that so that I am ready for it. And then when I'm in season, I'll drop it back down to 2 minutes because I'm competing. And then when I'm competing, I'm at class more. Like, it winds up happening.
You're doing more sparring at class, right? But you're trying to keep your burst energy up.
Well, but you can kind of, it's analogous, right? You can kind of keep an eye on the clock and kind of, when you're sparring, try to get that same effect that you have on the bag. That, I'm going to go as hard as I can for 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to give everything I've got and then take my break.
My goal a lot of times is just wear the other guy out.
Right.
Not beat them up, but like...
And if you do this effectively, and I'm not trying to, like, make everybody the same asshole I am, but, if you do this effectively, then what's going to wind up happening is, when you are training, most people you train with are going to get gassed before you do, because you intentionally focused on improving your stamina. And so it winds up, there's a couple of cool things that happen here. When you're fighting people who are not as skilled as you get to focus on your technique so much more, because your stamina and speed is never an issue.
Yeah.
And it also pushes you to the point where you're working skill-based with the more advanced members of your school or your club.
Right.
Once my cardio went up, once I had the longer stamina, all of a sudden I found that I could compete, not perfectly, but I could compete better against the top tier of fighters in Simbrogi, just because they couldn't wear me out.
Right.
We would get 3 minutes into a sparring session, and I'm still okay. I can still throw an overhaul with some power, and I couldn't have done that 6 months before when I didn't have that cardio built up.
And you have to have that foundation for the strategy to be effective at competition.
Yes.
And that's the part that everyone's like, well, I don't need to worry about my physical game. I need to worry about my strategy more, because strategy can outdo physical attributes. And I laugh at them every time, because it's like every time you get somebody more athletic, stronger, whatnot, your strategy is going to die as soon as your cardio does.
Yeah, because to go back to that kickboxing or boxing analogy, you know, you can have the best technique in the world, but if you're so tired that your jab has become a row,
yeah,
well, you're not hitting anybody anymore. It's over at that point for you.
Yeah, you are actively done. You're done for the competition. You're in survival mode.
Yeah, and not that you can't, you know, I mean, clearly you don't have to be in peak physical shape to compete and do well and have fun at a HEMA tournament.
Right.
But if we're going to talk about taking our game up a notch, at some point you've got to be able to last in the ring.
Because I've seen people not die, but like cardiovascular one day.
Still bad.
Cardiovascularly give up in a fight. And it's sad, because if you're still going further than them, and you can just see they're like, just hurry up and kill me so we can get this over with. And I feel bad, but at the same time, I feel better being on this end of that spectrum than that end of that spectrum.
I had a fight at Bro that went my way. Bro 2019, Baton Rouge Open. Sorry, in case that's confusing. And yeah, it was close to the end of like my second round of fights. I forget exactly how it was set up, whether that was elims or whether that was pools. I don't exactly remember, but like I'd already fought that morning, and then we were in another set of fights, and my opponent was way more skilled than me. Like, oh my god, the first two exchanges, I just got my ass handed to me. He just picked apart my defense like I wasn't trying, and it was frustrating. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't frustrating, but he put every bit of energy and effort he had into those first two exchanges, and I was able to come back and win because he was gassed. You know, which isn't bad. I'm not trying to hate on anybody. I'm just saying, if you want, at some point when we're competing, we want to win.
Right.
And if you want that edge, part of it is making sure you can go for that 3 minutes.
Because
at as much or as close to full strength as you can. And that I like telling that story, because this is a moment where if I hadn't put in the statistical work, if I hadn't put in the strength training and the cardio, he'd have picked me apart in 3 rounds and we'd have been done.
Your attributes, if you would not have trained them, it didn't matter what strategy you had in your head, he was going to win.
Yeah, and this is probably a really good segue into the next thing to talk about, which is strategy, because I want to win my fights on strategy. I want to be constantly improving. I want to be the best fencer I can be. That should always be my goal. But I'm not getting there if I can't breathe through a 3-minute match.
Right. If you're huffing and puffing, you're not thinking. You're thinking air, breathe. Caveman brain. You're not.
And so people with, you know, I have the advantage of a slighter frame. I have the advantage of a workout routine that's very effective for me and helpful. You know, so somebody who is a more skilled fencer, who gets gassed, I can beat them.
Yeah.
So you want to shore up that weakness. You want to be more effective in those tournaments. That's your first one to shore up.
Right.
So let's talk about strategy. Let's move on to how we should be talking about training, because we're going to train our bodies. We have to train our minds in a similar mindset. Talk to us about that.
So strategy is what the manuals are designed to give us.
Okay.
So like Ringek has a set of strategies. Vadi has a set of strategies. Insert whatever style. That's why I usually refer to it as the German system, because they have the Lichtenauer kind of system of how to do things. Meyer kind of breaks that a little bit, but everyone has almost their little differences. I'm going to summarize it into basically 3 main strategies. Okay. You have the offensive fighter, whose job is to overwhelm the other person. Now that could be I buffalo in, get into grapple, and take you down.
Sure.
That could be I go on the offensive, and with my feinting and whatnot, I take, with the constant attacks, I'm going to find an opening and get you.
Which is, respectively, Kyle's and my strategies.
Right. Just whether it's feinting my way in or whatnot.
Right. No, I understand.
That's your first primary strategy. So whenever somebody is coming at you hardcore, that's it. Number 2 is the opposite of that, which is the counter fighter. This is a person who is waiting for you to attack and using that against you. So like, I know you're going to come in at me hot. I step offline and I strike your limb, or I appear here, draw you into attack me, and then I take advantage of that. I wait for you to do something so that I can sucker you.
Right.
And that...
Or even set up something very aggressive looking to force a reaction that we can take advantage of.
Yeah, like I provoke you, you attack me in a counterattack, and I use that against you. Like, So if this person is actively attacking, putting pressure on the other person in order to overwhelm them, this person is either letting them attack them or provoking them so that they'll attack them because they want to use your attack against you.
Which is that fun combo. I'm gonna call you out, that Zornhut that you use. That it's wildly aggressive looking, but is honestly like the most pulled back trap.
Right. I pull back, I throw, but then I completely void your sword, and
because it's about the reaction, because you're using that aggression to provoke. Sorry, I'm gonna get lost in that strategy. I like that strategy. I'm just not good at it.
Right. So we have these two, and then in Filipino Kali we call it the rubber band man, because what you're able to do, and this is the most frustrating strategy of all, is you're dancing in and out of the Zufectin or the fighting line. So like the one hit strike, like one step strike hit. You're able to, with very subtle footwork, be able to work your way in to hit them, and then exit, whether you appear to exit or not, the fighting range.
Right.
So that my opponent thinks he can hit me.
It's all about tricks of distance and measure. It's all about knowing your range incredibly well. And it's about the subtleties, the footwork. Yeah.
Because I can, as much as I want to, I can lay that attack in on you, but suddenly I'm like a ghost, I'm gone.
So there's an infinite, like those are clearly the broad strokes that I think most people can probably, if they didn't already intuitively understand that, they can probably listen to you describe those and kind of basically place themselves and their general strategies inside that, and that's cool. But there's an infinite number of combinations. There's
Meyer has his 4, someone else has their 6.
And there's an infinite number of combinations inside that. I'm more of a speed fighter, you're more of a strength fighter, but I could fight 35 other speed fighters in a tournament, and none of us are using the same strategies.
Right.
So talk for a minute about, again, because we're trying to be very specific and practical with this conversation. How do you train strategy in an effective way for a coming tournament season? So let's give ourselves a scenario. We've kind of been talking about on season, off season. We are part of the Southern Historical Fencing League. So let's continue to use that scenario. You have the season coming up. You're gonna go to Weird. You're gonna go to Bro. You're gonna go to Gesselfest, and I'm forgetting others. I'm sorry. I'm not hating on anybody. I'm just rambling. How do you pick strategies to focus on, and how should you train strategies to be as successful as possible at each tournament?
So the first strategy I pick is the one I am best at, which is, and I'm going to use Myers 4 type. The first
I'm sorry, I asked the question, I'm going to interrupt. Maybe we should back up and talk about one more thing first. You have a thing that you say when we're training that I've taken to heart and I think is very helpful. I think you're quoting somebody when you say it, but when you're talking about Olympic level martial artists, these fighters, they don't have 50 plays in their head that they're planning on using at the Olympics.
Oh yeah.
How many plays? Like I'm just starting. Give your rank.
This is the Mike Swain, who is an Olympic level judoka. I was at a training seminar with him once, and he said like an Olympic level judoka, like there's 72 or something like that throws in judo.
Right.
He said an Olympic level person has 3. That's their 3 primary.
And I want to take a minute and emphasize this as a math teacher, which is what I do for a living. You're talking about a very small percentage of this. 3 out of 72. 3. Sure, you could train all 72, but how effective are you going to be? 3. You're picking them. Sorry, go on.
So you have 3 primary throws that you're going to get 80% of your throws with. Then you have 4 follow-up throws. So now you have 7 throws.
Okay.
So if each of those 3 fail, you have your 4 backups that are like, this sets up this. And then you have your like, maybe like 6 or 8 weird, pull them out of your butt, very low percentage. I'm losing the match. I need to completely change my game techniques.
Okay.
So out of possibly 72, right? 3, 6, 7, you're using about 15 at max throws out of an entire system. So, yet again, it's, if I can go in there and I can win a competition with 3 moves,
you should do that.
I should do that.
Yeah.
Because you have 5 Meisterhauen.
Well, again, if it's about showing our art by the rubric given, which is winning the tournament, then yeah, that makes sense. Do you think, I want to talk about more of this, but do you think that we run the risk when we think about it this way of of becoming that Mortal Kombat player who only knows the one flying kick and just suppresses the opponent? Like, how do you balance that?
If you have a flying kick in real life, right? I'll actually give a real life example. Dan Inosanto was going to the Philippines, and there was a champion of stick fighting. Now, this is no gear, stick, knockout to submission, right? Stick
I'm not
fighting.
gonna lie, I've been in martial arts long enough now. That sounds fun.
And this guy, he was the champion at the time, and Dan wanted to go train under this guy, and everyone told him, don't do it. They're like, well, why? He's the champion. It's like, all he had, he would have the stick here, and he would throw a straight down. And that's all.
Cut to 8. What
cut to 8, Scheidel, Howe, whatever. Just a straight down hit. That's all he had.
But he was so good at it, he won.
He could do distance management so well that he would move around until he had that shot. And whenever he hit you with it, you went out.
Yeah, I can see that.
If you are that good at it, do it.
Well, but then we come down to a little bit more of a philosophical question, right? Mm-hmm. So, what is your goal in any given tournament? And this is why I really think you have to split them up. And I know there's arguments to be had here, but I think you have to split the 5 S's up, the first 3, and then at least the last 2 together. Maybe split those into each their own category. But we have to train strategy based on what our goal is.
Right.
You know, if you're talking about speed, strength, and stamina, you've just got to improve your stats. You know, you got to put the time in and level up. You just have to build the attributes. But with strategy, you have some choices to make. What kind of a fighter do you want to be? What kind of a tournament do you want to have? And I think there's part of this that goes into, like, experience. When you're less experienced, your strategy is going to be whatever works. Mm-hmm. And as you
throw shit at the wall and see what happens.
Yeah, you're just throwing all the pasta at the wall and seeing what's done. I'm hungry this morning, I guess. I don't know all the food metaphors. Whereas once you gain a little bit more experience and you're not just out there doing whatever happens, maybe you want a different experience out of this tournament. Maybe your goal this tournament is to see if you can pull off for your own sake a particular strategy or something like that. So your personal philosophy and how you want to engage with the tournament is going to, I think,
it's going to
play
change
into this hugely. But either way, even at a more advanced level, even trying weirder stuff, you're not trying to pull off 20 different plays. You're not trying to memorize the perfect counter to everything that could happen. Mm-hmm. You should be, and I think you agree with this. I'm not trying to branch way out here. You should be, when you're preparing for a tournament, preparing your set of plays,
right?
What you are hoping to accomplish, and clearly you'll adjust, and people will mess up your plan, and you'll have to. That's where the art comes in.
Right.
But you have to decide to what extent you want to do what works and try to win the tournament, and to what extent you want to be trying your new plays and seeing what you can accomplish against people you don't generally fight.
And I think one of the number one ways, if I'm going to select a strategy to go in for competition, it is what has been working really well for me in sparring.
Yeah.
So if I'm going into sparring, and of the new techniques and stuff I've been working on in the offseason, I literally just start playing with stuff when we're first starting getting ready. What's working well for me? What my timing's really good. Is this weird crump how I've been working on working correctly? Is Zorn, like my good old standby, is it working? And then I have 2 or 3 little techniques of I'm going to use my Wrath Cut to deceptively get in. I'm going to run them over with Einlaufen, or I'm going to deceive, move back, and hit them at range. Like, those are my 3 strategies I'm walking in with.
Right.
And then if anything goes to pot, I'm going to pull back on other stuff that I know and specifically develop something to deal with that person.
Okay, that makes sense. So how would you... I'm going to ignore the advanced practitioners for the moment. I'm sorry if we've got advanced practitioners watching and you were really hoping for nuggets of wisdom from Johnathan and Kyle. We're going to disappoint you. But let's separate out kind of tournament newbies and beginners, kind of that newling level, and then more of a Lehrling intermediate level. So let's make it very specific. Let's say we're giving advice to a newling entering the newling tournament at Gesselfecht in 2021.
Okay.
You know, cross fingers, knock on wood, hope we have one. And then we're also giving advice to somebody who's coming in and doing the Lehrling tournament at Gesselfecht in 2021. How would you, and I want to jump, I have opinions too, but I want you to start. How would you suggest that newling approach strategy preparing for that tournament?
So if I'm taking a newling and I'm going to take them to a tournament, the first thing is I need to know the parameters of the tournament specifically, because, and this is going to be kind of game theory, I need to know certain aspects of a tournament. 1, what are the afterblow rules? Because your strategy for how to get in and out is based on how much time you have to suppress the other person. Second, is grappling allowed? Third, what is the time limit? Is it self-call? Like, these little aspects are things that have to go into strategy, because it's like, if I'm going over certain terrain in warfare, I have to know what's the boggy terrain, what's the rocky terrain, what's the sheer terrain. I have to understand that in order to formulate my strategy. The number one strategy is hit.
I want to pause for a minute, because there's a really good example of this that's not negative in any way. So we went in 2019. The tournament team from Simbrogi went and competed at the Mid-Continental HEMA Open Macho, which I think was a super fun little. I don't know. People told me it was cheesy, but I thought it was cute. I liked it. So we went and fought in Macho, which was a fun tournament, and I enjoyed myself immensely. I'm glad I went to Denver. Great. You get a chance, you should go and fight. It was quite an experience, but it was very different. It was a very different experience than the Southern Historical Fencing League. And the one thing that struck me the most about the rule changes was, in the Southern Historical Fencing League, we mostly, I think always, I don't hesitate to make a grandiose statement like that, but we start pretty far apart. There's a lot of room for the onset. There's a lot of room for flourishing and playing that game, and showing your art in that way, setting up your openings outside of Sufectin, quite honestly, which is...
We have a big ring, you can play around it.
Yeah, and that's what we're used to fighting. And not that the rings weren't big in Denver, but they were narrow. Not quite strips like you would see in epi fencing, but narrower than what we're used to fighting with here in the Midwest. And they started us... Man, it's been a while now, but so I don't want to give that like an exact number, but they started us much closer, much closer. I felt like with it had to be a pretty deep lunge, but with a lunge from the starting position, most of the time I could have, at least theoretically, hit my opponent.
Basically at Sufectin, almost at Sufectin.
Yeah. I don't want to make a statement that's going to get all the technical nerds mad at us on the comments, but yeah, exactly. We were much closer than I'm used to. And my strategy, I had to work that. The rule system made it so that I could win or lose a match on the starting gun if I was ready for it and if I trained for it. And I am a speed fighter, so that kind of lended itself to my my strengths, and I was able to play that game pretty well a few times, but I also got just straight up beat at that game a few times because it's not the game I'm used to playing. So specifically going to Denver, one of the things I trained, one of the things I used to varying effect, but was that kind of jump off the line speed, you know, going straight from set, ready to immediate thrusts and very, very controlled thrusts, because it's as much as I'm a danger to them off the line.
Yeah, blocking off the line and coming in immediately right off the start.
So yeah, so I did, you know, the thing that we're advising here, where I took 3 or 4 strategies into that tournament that I wanted to fight with, and it was dictated at least in part by a rule set that I wasn't familiar with, that wasn't normal to me. I would never walk into a shuffle tournament thinking, man, if I've got that jump off the line, I can get them. That wouldn't be a strategy I could possibly use in a shuffle tournament.
Because we start too far away from it.
Right, maybe on a reset, and yeah, sure, you know, like you'll get that on a reset to Krieg or whatever, but...
If you're banking on resetting to Krieg every time...
Yeah, that's not a strategy. That's a prayer at best.
You would literally have to walk in and then let yourself get ran out.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah. But in Colorado, one of my strategies was, if I felt like I could be faster than the guy across from me, I went for it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it worked every time, but it worked a lot.
Whenever you are put in different scenarios, you have to adjust your strategy. And when going into a fight, you have to realize what is the terrain of the field of combat. That's a good analogy
for it. I like that a lot.
Because, you know, if we're going to fight on ice, there's not going to be a lot of footwork. In the Philippines, there's different styles of martial arts based off of their terrain. Like, there's one style where essentially they're in, like, what we would call a Sanchin stance. It's a very, like, low stance. And there's very little footwork because they're fighting in rice paddies.
Yeah, it's all mud.
It's all mud. You don't do a lot of big movements. The guys who are more like in the forest or jungles and whatnot, their footwork is different. They do a lot of low stances. They move in and out more.
Kind of side to side motion.
Yeah, more. And then people who are more in open areas, they have more what we're used to, where it's like a hit and circle and like
stepping out, a lot of offline movement. Yeah, I know what you're talking
about. Okay, so strategy-wise, we're kind of like talking about like you need to know the rule set and whatnot to set up your game.
Right.
Okay. You need to know that because you need to know what you're not allowed to do.
And know which things are going to be different. Absolutely. Right. So, give your advice. Give your advice for picking strategies to a beginner. Assuming that the rule set's going to change, so we're not talking specifics. How should a newbie pick which strategies they're going to focus on for their first tournament?
So you need to know if you are an attacker or a counter fighter. So those two strategies that we talked about, like I broke it into 3. The middle one is more of an intermediate advanced level thing.
So if you're a newbie, don't try that.
Yeah, pick one.
Okay.
Because if you're going in there, you just need to basically, when you're a newbie, you're a hammer. Everything is a nail. You have the techniques you're good at. Go in there and do them. And do them to the best of your ability. That's it.
So if I'm a newbie, my first tournament, I should be looking at my training. I should be talking to my training partners, talking to my coaches and instructors, and I should be picking how many things that I think I could win a tournament with or win a fight with.
If I'm a brand new person, 1, 2 at max.
So like maybe if I've got a little bit of a feint that I've been working on, say this is going to be my
So you
tactic.
have a feint to 1 and an Unterhau, right?
Right.
And it works golden for you. That's how you're going to basically set up most of your encounters.
Okay. So you're going to pick the thing or the 2 things that you're pretty good at, and other than that, just kind of focus on staying alive.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's assumed we're all talking on the same page here.
Don't get hit.
This is the art of self-defense. You know, we're the way I have all my students echo back at me. We start class and I'm like, how do you win a sword fight? And they're like, don't die. You know, and that's obviously the basics, but we have to have a win condition.
Right.
So you're saying pick at most 2 win conditions, plays that you have been taught, that you have practiced in sparring, that you feel some affinity for, and it doesn't matter what they are.
Doesn't matter what
just
they
a
are.
couple of things that you're good at.
Yeah, like if my deal is I move up to the line in right fluke, I see where their sword, if they're in right bomb top, I'm going to do an ab sets into thrust off of that. And I can usually nail someone with that. Do it. But you have to move around, get yourself in position, and then do your technique.
Right, and I'm going to add that this is going to be very club specific, right? So if your school or your club has been focusing recently on some good thrusting mechanics, and that's something that you've had some success with, that should, if this is your first tournament, that should be what you do use.
I mean, that happens. You should, whatever you're doing well, and if it's like been the club focus, like that's what you should go in there and do.
Yeah.
Like you should do what you know. Don't go into a tournament to do weird, wacky shit you've never done before.
Yeah, don't go look up some weird play and try to get your instructor to teach you it a month before the tournament so you can use that in the tournament. That's a bad plan.
A month out from a tournament, you should add nothing from a month into the tournament.
When you're in that transition, off-season, we talked about the 3 time periods of training. Off-season, you're adding new things. Transition time.
Every day's daily reduction.
It's got it. Yeah, you're bringing it down. You're narrowing in on what you want to do. Right. Okay, cool. So you're going to pick the things that fit you. Do you think we should focus when we're picking strategies on body type kind of things? Like you and I have talked extensively this morning about how you use more of that buffalo rush-in technique. I use more of that speed feint. That is pretty body type lined up.
If they are newling, it's what they do well. I don't care what... You're saying strip all the complexity out of it and just answer the question, am I effective at this? Does this guy have an Oberhau that hits? Does this guy have a Zverka that can hit? Does this guy have a feint that he can actually pull off? It's all about... when it comes to strategies, like what can you actually pull off when the pressure is on?
Okay, good.
Because I've known quite a few people that are buffalo shaped who are not buffaloes. They're like Ferdinands. They're like not. They're gentle bulls.
I like that analogy. That's fun.
So like they don't want to run people over,
right?
And nor do they have the skill set yet to do so safely. But what they can do is they can do a hand snipe.
So you're saying don't try to force anything.
Never force
whatever is working for you. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And something that you can do with moderate amount of effort under pressure. It's all about, can I do it whenever the bell rings?
And that reminds me, I'd love to have a whole episode sometime in the future where we talk about training under pressure and how to increase pressure with training, because it's always a disparity, but that's a different thing.
Right.
All right, so let's jump ahead and let's talk for a minute about a more intermediate fighter, which is probably the greater bulk. If you're on YouTube watching podcasts about
you're in the
intermediate
intermediate range,
I'm guessing this isn't your first tournament you're getting ready for. So let's talk a minute about what we would recommend strategy-wise for a more intermediate practitioner, somebody who's been to a couple of tournaments, somebody who's looking not just to have an enjoyable weekend, but somebody who's kind of hoping to
be a contender.
Yeah. Right. What would you recommend to start working on in that transition phase, or to start paring it down to? How would a more intermediate fighter prepare for a tournament strategy-wise?
You need 3 setups for your fights. Okay?
All right, define that.
Like, I go out and I'm going to attack your hands. no matter what, whether you attack me or whatnot, I'm going to first attack you as long as range as possible, so that you have to do something about that, so then I can move in on you.
So maybe have more of an overarching strategy, whereas the new lean is going to be like, oh, I have this play.
Yeah.
And you're going to go that way. As a more intermediate practitioner, I'm going to be like, man, I've been working on my distance management, and I've been working on my hand shots. Yeah. I want to get forearm and hand shots that keep me very safe. That's going to be my overarching strategy, and then I'll work on plays inside that.
Right, because that's the first thing I would start at. I would be like, okay, so this is a place to start for a fighter. It's like, okay, play the range, the longest range you can, until that stops working. Then you need the next thing. So like, okay, I'm firing at his hands. Now this guy is like either defending it, or he's like, however he defends it, which I should figure out in sparring. How does he deal with that? Most people will start to pull their hands back. So if he does that, then it's 1, 2, move in deeper. So now I have my deeper strategy, which goes from...
Right, because that intermediate level brings us away from this is my play, and stronger into this is my goal, and I have a couple of paths to get there.
Right, so my goal then is I have follow-ups now to when the first thing fails. So like...
Second intentions.
Yeah, my first intention is to hit your hands. That doesn't work. Well, as I cut to your hands, you pull them back, then I go into a thrust. You're going to, if that fails, you're going to block to the side. Well, then I'm going to rush him with a pommel, and I'm going to knock you to the ground. So it's a pretty simple little, like, 1, 2, 3. So now we're into combinations.
Okay.
So I go from a
So now we're talking strategies that are adaptive. Okay.
My Zorn Hoot to Zorn How. Okay? I hit with that because it messes with people's sense of timing and distance, right? That fails. Wrench, let's say, because the person is blocking it repeatedly. It's like, okay, well now as I go, I pull it so it doesn't hit, and then I go into a thrust. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to grab their sword and get in close and then take them down. So I have this kind of like 3-hit little combo over what commonly happens.
Yeah.
And then maybe I start out with a thrust. And then I Dirk Fexen under, or Dirk, I just dip my point and come under it. And then that doesn't work, then I smack your hands on the way out.
Right. So now, lots of contingencies and lots of plans.
Right, and I just have this common little, like, okay, this is what my normal entry. This is the common way it screws up. This is my next thing on that. 1, 2, 3, and then escape.
It's more complex than just having a play you're trying to accomplish. But it's not, you don't want to widen out. This is the big advice I would give on an intermediate scale, is you don't want to widen out to the point where you're just entertaining all possibilities.
Yeah.
You're thinking in terms of, I have a goal. I want to wind up in this position to end the fight. I'm a super nerd, and I think in Magic the Gathering decks, you don't want infinite win conditions because none of them will ever show up. You want a win condition. You play this card combination.
This is the most common thing I keep running into.
Yeah, and so you want to have that goal in mind. This is how I intend to end my match. And because you're at intermediate at this point, you kind of have an idea what's going to stop you. You have an idea of the things that could get in your way and ruin your plan.
And some of those plans are defensive plans. Like, I have someone who's going to run me over. It's like, okay, so what do I do in this situation? Well, here. But it turns into, when I am sparring, I'm getting these kind of 3 ways of entering in on a person. Because as we're getting closer to tournament, I'm doing fewer things.
Right. This is why it's important during your transition phase of training to pare down what you're doing. Instead of trying everything that you're taught in class that night in sparring, you're getting ready for a tournament. You're doing a different thing than the people who aren't going to that tournament next month are doing.
Right.
You need to end that sparring, even if it means removing your ego from it even more than you have already and taking some losses to some less skilled fighters. You need to be figuring out which category you're trying to win with. What is your goal at this tournament, and practicing that so that you can see what newbie level fighters are going to do when faced with that problem, so that you can see what the advanced fighters and instructors in your club are going to do to shut you down, because they will. And you've got to be able to sharpen yourself against that if you expect to go to a tournament and have any success.
And if you can pull that technique off against someone who doesn't know, that's awesome. But if you can pull a technique, well, it's not even just one technique. If you can pull a combination of an entry to a win against somebody who knows your trick. So, like, I had one deal for a while. I would wait for people to attack me. I would crump to the side, and then I would back edge strike. And I had, like, a little 3 follow-up to that. Like, it could be here, it could be here, it could be here, and then this is how I would exit. people got so used to it, like they started hesitating to throw strikes. So then I would try to I had to provoke them. Okay, thank you. They knew it was coming, but I could still get ahead of them enough.
Yeah, and that's a real difference. Like I'll talk about that real quick. I'm going to give examples of these specifically, but I was in one of the strategies I use very often is feinting attacks. I want you to think I'm up here and I'm coming in down here. That's a overarching strategy I use pretty extensively.
Yeah, you provoke to hit.
Provoke, hit, because I'm a speed fighter. And I've been in rounds at tournaments where I just do the same feint to 1, cut to 7, feint to 1, cut to 7, 5 times in a row, 5 wins, and away we go, because the person I was fighting was not ready for it. They didn't have a good feint defense. They couldn't see what I was doing, and I used literally the same cut every time, which is effective and works, and that you leave that feeling pretty good.
We had a saying in kickboxing: if you walk up and you punch someone with a jab, and it keeps hitting, what should you do? You just keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, but then, same tournament, I'm using that same overarching strategy, and I'm fighting Anthony. Actually, this was Gesselfesten 2019. I was using that strategy, and I wound up having a tiebreaker match with Anthony. That was probably my favorite match of that tournament. And we only went 3 rounds, and I used the same strategy on him because my nerves were way up here. I'd been fighting all day, and I decided, even though it's Anthony, I'm gonna stick to my strategy. And I won the match. Right, I didn't win each exchange, but I won 2 out of 3, and I'm very, very proud of that. That was a big moment for me. Anthony's a much better fencer than I am. But it was because, and this I think speaks to the strategy question we're talking about, I'd been focusing on that strategy that day. I'd been really working on it. This was my play. This is what I was trying to accomplish. And because I had dialed it in, even though he's a better fencer than I am, even though the things he was throwing at me were incredibly difficult for me to deal with, I had practiced that to the point where when he gave me an opening for that feint cut, maybe it wasn't specifically 1-7, but I had that timing dialed in, and even against a more skilled opponent than me, I was able to pull it off twice when it mattered, because that was the thing I'd practiced. That was the thing I'd prepared for.
Right. What you can do under pressure is what you can actually do.
Right, exactly. And I wasn't trying to shut down everything he could possibly do. I wasn't trying to have a really fancy answer to what I expected him to fight like.
That stick fighter that only has that number 8.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's the best way to prepare, but that was a moment that I felt wildly successful. I was wildly successful. I beat Anthony. That's not nothing.
Yeah,
and that's a trick. And I'm not saying I could do it. He'd get me 8 times out of 10. I'm sure of it. Probably 9, but I got him that once, and I was very proud of it because I dialed in and decided in this moment my strategy was not widespread. My strategy was simple. Yeah. I'm going to run this.
And simple things tend to work under pressure.
Yeah. Okay, so instead of going on to examples, since we are running out of time, let's go ahead and just real quick spend about 5 or 6 minutes talking about the final S, which is spirit, which is clearly much harder to train. Let's define it, and then we'll talk about training that.
Okay, spirit is your ability to operate at different levels of stress successfully.
Okay.
There are 3 main areas of psychological arousal whenever you are competing. Okay, so in sports psych we have low level arousal, moderate level, and then high level arousal. To give rough numbers, about 80% of us do our best work under low pressure conditions.
Seems pretty obvious and intuitive.
Yeah. 15% of us do really well under moderate amounts of stress, and only about 5% of people do well under extreme stress. Like, they do their best work. This is the best work. Not that you couldn't operate, but you're giving your optimal performance.
So is the goal to manage where your stress level is, or is the goal to train to the point where you're effective at a high stress level?
Both. The first thing is you need to learn how to get yourself mentally into your comfort zone. So some people are going to be over there, do breathing, meditative stuff.
You see guys with the headphones in their ears.
In the ears. Whatever they're going to do, they're going to simmer them, get their chill on, and they go into a fight almost...
Or amp themselves up, depending on the person.
Right.
Right.
Some people are over there yelling and screaming and beating on stuff because they need that high level of... If you see a power lifter, they're over there slapping him and hitting guys and getting them...
You need that hype.
Because that's what they do well. Whenever I try to do for a max rep, I need to have a moderate amount. So mine, I have to get myself pumped, and then I have to calm myself down so that I stay in that middle, because I'm a moderate level of stress performer. My first round, my first fight or two, I always throw out because either I'm way too amped or I'm way too calm, and I need to get hit a few times to get me right in that zone, so I'm performing optimally.
That makes sense.
Some people, they walk in there, and since it's high pressure, they do really well at the bat, but they start to calm down, and they start to falter. So you need to know where you're
That's closer to where I am, yeah.
So you need to know how to move yourself around, but also you need to know whenever I'm in a bad zone, so like I'm being too lazy right now because I'm too relaxed, how can I still operate well? What strategies work for me in this? Those are the deceptive counter fighter. If I'm relaxed, cool. If I'm ultra amped up, just run the guy over. Turn it into football or boxing. Like just tackle them.
And I would say we intentionally spent kind of less time on Spirit than any of the other 5S's because this is something that's very difficult for us to give you a recommendation on how to train spiritually, for lack of a I don't know.
Psychological.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know because there's lots of ways I think about it, and it's very personal. I would argue that this is where the discipline and mental acuity of the art really comes into play. And that the primary goal, once you, and again, it cascades. I think it's very important to remember when we're talking about the 5S's and talking about physically preparing yourself for a tournament the way we have been all morning. This is a cascade. You start at the top and work your way down, almost like the inverse of the Maslow's hierarchy kind of a thing. You can't really talk about spirit until we've already talked about
everything
all of the other things, because the spirit won't win it if you don't have the speed and the
right. You can want it all day, and you can keep yourself in the right mindset. But if you don't got if you're going to Daytona 500 in a Volkswagen,
yeah, you're just done. It's just not happening.
You can want it all day.
But once you've gotten here, once you're at the point where you feel like it doesn't mean you have to be where you want to be in all the other four, but you've at least addressed them and talked about how you're going to deal with all four of those. When we're talking about spirit, I think the best recommendation I can give is this is about knowing you. This is about being introspective enough that you know what makes you feel comfortable. You know what puts you in your comfort zone with the stresses. You know what mindset to have about that tournament. You've heard me kind of go back and forth on this throughout this podcast episode, because the big thing at a HEMA tournament is, am I focusing on showing my art well and being a good participant in a good sport, or am I here to win? And I don't think those things have to be in opposition to each other, clearly. But your mental health during a tournament is about that balance to a certain extent. You've got to, and it can't go any direction. I think there's people who give bad advice by saying you can't care about winning, you have to care about participating. I am not that person. That is not how I have success at a tournament. That's not how I feel good about my performance. I don't have to win to feel good. That's not who I am.
If I don't care,
but if I don't care, I'm going to fight badly. If I don't care, I'm not going to be in a good mental space. I have to care enough about the winning. Yeah, it's a balance, and it's and where I balance that and where Kyle balances that are going to be different places. I mean, clearly, and where you balance that is going to be a completely different spot. Which is why I say the best advice I can give on this is know yourself. Some of that takes experience. It's hard if this is your first tournament you're preparing for, like that newling we've been describing this morning. You're not going to know. You're going to have to guess and try. As you have more experience, as you become that intermediate fighter, my big recommendation is to be introspective and think critically about where you were mentally at the end of different fights and how that felt, where you were at the beginning of different fights and how you performed. But then talk to your coaches and instructors and class and club mates. They're gonna have some insight for you here, and this is where you have to be open. You have to be willing to take some criticism and have people talk honestly about your emotions, which is not fun.
No.
But by the time we're talking about spirit and the 5S's, we are dealing with. It's a holistic idea. I'm not trying to get too mystical on you guys, but like you have to deal with your emotions to be a good fighter.
Right, because here's the thing. When it comes to like making it to this point, when you first go out and you're first learning, you're going out there to do one thing, and that is I'm going to attempt to successfully do what I've trained. Everything after that turns into when do I do that best? And that's why tournaments are a point of discovery, because when you put the pressure on, you're going to realize I'm not a pressure fighter. I'm a relaxed, move around, kind of set this up. I'm a moderate. I have to be pumped up a little bit, but not too much. Or I am a berserker. I got to be fired up, and I do my best work.
And it takes experimentation to find that.
It does. Sometimes you got to go out there and completely just get wrecked because you would not psychologically get yourself pumped up enough because you couldn't, or you didn't want to. Or sometimes you go out there and it's your first tournament, so you're going to be in the red zone the whole way through. And you got to be able to accept, like, okay, now I know something about myself. Because that's a point of competition that is good, is the discovery of ourselves through martial prowess and experimentation.
And I'm going to wrap this up because we got to be done. But that's probably, like, at the end of the day, my favorite thing about competition. Training martial arts gives me a lot of benefits. I'm very happy to just go and train and work and do the conditioning and learn the skills and all of that. But I think... I'm on this podcast, and I am on the tournament team at Simbrogi, and I am all of these things because the thing I like the most is what I discover about myself at a tournament. And learning to dial in very specifically where I need to be and how I need to interact with people to be the best version of myself. That's under pressure is where I learn the most about myself, and I like HEMA tournaments for that.
I saw this on a video the other day. I'm going to have to look it up so that way I make sure this is 100% correct, but the general gist of it is the Latin or Greek origin of the word competition means to grow collectively or to grow together.
Nice.
So if we view a competition...
Excellent.
If we view a competition as an opportunity to grow together with people versus me putting myself above another, you will never walk into a tournament with a bad mindset. This is just a growth opportunity. No one's going to give a crap in 5 years who won gold at whatever. They're going to care who is there, who cares, and who is just like a good person at the end.
I agree. And that's a great note to end on. We've been going over. I know that's kind of abrupt, but we're going to go ahead in there. This is us just bullshitting, and hopefully you found it useful and helpful. If you have specific questions you'd like to ask, either about specific rule sets and how to prepare for them, we'd be happy to sit here and bullshit about that.
I mean, we have tons
or
of
about training techniques. If you're looking for personal recommendations, that's something Kyle and I enjoy doing. We both, I mean, neither of us do it professionally or anything.
And if you want to come and train in Oklahoma, especially if you have had a vaccine in your arm,
that's right.
I mean, come on over to Oklahoma, train with some brogy. We are always open. We will 7 days a week. Someone will find an opportunity if you come to town to train with you.
For sure.
And usually house you. So
we like training. We like working with new people. And Kyle and I specifically, not to toot our own horns, but we'd be happy to talk to you about like a physical training regimen is something we both have significant experience with. So
yeah, I've gotten people ready for everything from kickboxing to MMA fights.
Yeah. So if you love what we're saying, those are our recommendations. If you hate what we're saying, tell us so. We'll argue with you.
He'll argue with you. I have better shit to do.
All right. Well, guys, this has been Fighting Words. Thank you so much for listening to us rant, ramble, and bullshit. We'll see you next time.
And if you ain't training, you're not going to be gaining.
That's true. Have a good one.